This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Bruchim Abba, welcome everyone. Parshas Seitzei. The pasuk tells us about the Isser of marrying into the nation of Ammon and Moav. It says, "Lo yavoi Ammoni Moavi b'kal Hashem." Someone from Ammon and Moav cannot come into the congregation of the Ribono Shel Olam. Gam dor asiri lo yavel b'kal Hashem. Even the 10th generation cannot come into the congregation ad olam, forever. Why? So the pasuk says, "Al devar asher lo kidmu eschem balechem u'v'mayim," because they didn't bring you bread and water. Baderach b'zeh you're coming out of Mitzrayim, and you needed bread and you needed water. V'asher sachar alechas Bilam ben Ba'ar mepesar aram na'aram l'kalalek, and also because they hired Bilam to curse you, and they hired Bilam to persuade you and entice you to commit arayos with the Bnei Moav. It happens to be, just as a side point, I saw this morning, this past summer I had the privilege to be at the kever of the Maram Shif in Frankfurt. Maram Shif has a wondrous drush. In the end of Masechta Chulin, Maram Shif says, on the one hand, the pasuk says they got Bilam to get the Bnei Moav to mezana with Klal Yisrael, and here the pasuk says they didn't bring bread and water. Like, which one was it? Was it that they didn't give us bread, or that they hired the Bnei Moav to be mezana? So the Maram Shif says a wondrous thing. The Gemara says in Bava Metzia, Yud Gimel Dvarim Nemra B'Pas Shachris. The exact opposite of contemporary thinking. Nowadays, people wake up in the morning, and what do? They drink coffee. That's their breakfast until lunchtime. Right? No carbs, chas v'sham. Today, carbs is like the biggest poison in the world. But the Gemara says you got to eat carbs every single morning. The Gemara says, Yud Gimel Dvarim Nemru B'Pas Shachris. 13 good things happen when you eat bread in the morning. The Gemara says if you don't eat bread in the morning, you're going to be grouchy, you're going to be in a bad mood, you're going to have impure thoughts. The Gemara lists 13 things that happen if you don't eat breakfast. It's not good enough to eat. It's a shaila, actually. Is cornflakes good enough? Is Rice Krispies good enough? Is Corn Pops, Fruity Pebbles, Cocoa Pebbles, all that stuff, Fruit Loops? The Gemara says you got to eat bread. And the Gemara says if you eat bread, you'll be in a happy mood, you'll be in a positive mood, you'll get along with people. It's the Gemara. But anyway, one of the things the Gemara says that if you eat bread, you won't have impure thoughts. So the Maram Shif puts the two together. Because they didn't give us bread, therefore we had impure thoughts, so when they presented us with a temptation, we succumbed. That's how the Maram Shif learns. So this is a plug. Now, too many carbs is not good either, within moderation. But obviously, if you're just going to eat protein, lots of luck making it through the year, Everybody needs some degree. That's the Gemara. The Gemara says, Yud Gimel Dvarim Nemru B'Pas Shachris. Anyway, the question here is that this pasuk implies that if Ammon and Moav would have brought us bread, we would have had what to eat. It seems like they should have given us bread. Wait a second. Ammon and Moav doesn't give us bread? Is a Yid allowed to eat the bread of a guy? A Yid's not allowed to eat the bread of a guy. There's something called pasakim. So I'm not makbid on pasakim. You bet you are. Every single Jew is makbid on pasakim. We're allowed to have paspalter. The bread of a baker is mutter. The bread of a baker is mutter. That's why. Are you allowed to eat Arnold's? By the way, not all Arnold's. It has to have a hechsher. Some of the bread has oils in it. It has to have a hechsher. And by the way, you have to be very careful. Some of it is OUD. Or some of it is dairy, and if it's dairy, it's not going to have a hechsher on it. And you can make a salami sandwich, you're in double trouble. First of all, it's not kosher. Second of all, it's basar b'chalav. But anyway, even though it's made by a guy, pas palter is mutter. But the bread of an individual guy, let's say, Tony calls you up and says, Reb Yankel, I really appreciate working with you. Come over to my house. I'm going to bake you fresh Italian bread. So Tony, I can't eat your bread. You're not Jew. You're not. No, it's going to be kosher. You're going to take me to Gourmet Glatt. You're going to buy the ingredients. You're going to kosher my oven. You're going to watch me bake. You're going to bring a vad mashgiach, and I'm going to make you bread. You're allowed to eat it. You're not allowed to eat it. The bread of a guy you cannot eat. Only the bread of a baker, not an individual person. So the question here is, and we're going to come back to it, is the pasuk seems to say you're allowed to eat the bread of a guy. So that's not a problem. Because the bread of a guy is only asur b'drabanan. So the Torah matters it, and the Chachamim asur it. So we're going to examine, is that possible? Could the Chachamim asur something that the Torah explicitly says is mutter? And that's what we're going to analyze today. Today's subject is Hataz Hayadua, the well-known Taz. And we'll see which Taz it is. It's so well-known I don't know if anybody in the room knows about it. That's how well known it is. But this is called the Taz Hayadua, the well-known Taz, perhaps the most well-known Shita of the Taz on Shulchan Aruch. And the Taz deals with the following question. We all know that you're not allowed to blow shofar when Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos. Yeah, you're not allowed to blow shofar. Why are you not allowed to blow shofar? We're afraid Shema Yavireno Da'al Amas B'Shasram, which, by the way, does not mean we're afraid you're going to take the shofar in your house and show it to a chacham. We're afraid you're going to randomly find the shofar in the Rishus Harabim and take it to a chacham. That's the pshat in the Gemara. Shema Yavireno Da'al Amas. So, the question that the Mizrahi, one of the classic commentaries on Rashi, asks is, why do I need to invent a new gzeira that maybe you're going to carry the shofar Da'al Amas B'Shus Harabim? I have a much better reason why you're not allowed to blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah that comes out on Shabbos. In fact, I have a reason why you're never allowed to blow the shofar. Are you allowed to blow a clarinet on Yom Tov? No. You're allowed to blow a tuba on Yom Tov. You're allowed to blow allowed to play any instrument on Yom Tov. No, it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. That what? Shema Yisakin Kli Shiur. So why can't the Chachamim say, forget not blowing shofar Rosh Hashanah that comes out on Shabbos. You're not allowed to blow shofar, period. Shema Yisakin Kli Shiur. I mean, they said you can't blow a clarinet on Shabbos and Yom Tov, so you shouldn't be able to blow the shofar. So first the Taz says, come on, a shofar is not a musical instrument. That ain't no instrument. It's a foghorn, it just makes bah. It's not a music. It's not a real polished sound. It's a cry. It's a genuche ganach, yilule yala. It's not a musical instrument. So the gzeira of Shema Yisakin Kli Shiur does not apply. However, says the Taz, the Yisoid Atzum. Says the Taz, when could the rabbis? We know yesh koyach lechachamim lakor davar minat Torah. The rabbis have power to brew davar minat Torah. That's only if, for example, the Torah says blow shofar. Now, if the Torah says blow shofar, that means Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos. And the Chachamim come along and say, don't do it on Shabbos, because on Shabbos, Shema Yavirenu Da'al Amas B'Shus Harabim. But if the Torah says blow the shofar, the rabbis can't come and say, don't blow the shofar. The Torah says blow! So the rabbis are going to say, no, never blow? So what are you going to do with the pasuk? They don't do that. They can't uproot entirely an entire mitzvah. Yesh koyach lechachamim lakor davar minat Torah, when the mitzvah still has applicability. But to completely uproot the mitzvah that it never applies, the chachamim don't do that. This is a yisoid atzum of the Taz. You would have said the rabbis have the power to uproot something minat Torah b'sheval tasa. They can't say we're shanis, but they could say, don't take a lulav on Shabbos, don't take the Megillah on Shabbos, and maybe never take a shofar. No, they can't do that, or they don't do that. And we're going to clear hakira. Is it they don't want to do that? They shouldn't do that? They're not allowed to do it? They don't have the power to do it? We're going to have to iron out exactly what is the nakuda here. But the Taz says that if the chachamim are uprooting the mitzvah entirely, they don't do that. Says the Taz, this would answer the kasha of Tosfos and Megillah and Daf Daled Amud Beis. This also answers the Ran's kasha. Question: do you take the shofar when Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos? No. Do you take a lulav when Sukkot comes out on Shabbos? No. Do you take the Megillah? If Purim would come out on Shabbos, would you be able to lay the Megillah? No. Why? Shema Yavirenu. So if you have a little baby and the baby's born on Shabbos, you do the Milah on Shabbos. Why aren't we worried that you might take the knife and show it to a chacham, or take the baby and show it to a chacham, or bring the baby to the moyel? Shema Yavirenu Da'al Amas B'Shus Harabim, because all of these things are machshirei milah, which are not doicha Shabbos. Now Tosfos says as follows. Tosfos, it's not a kasha, because who does the milah? Only an expert. No, it's not amateur hour. Milah is not time for amateur hour. So an expert will know he can't carry Dalet Amos. But who's blows shofar? Anybody could blow the shofar. You don't have to be an expert. A guy with good windpipes, he could blow the shofar. Who takes a lulav? Everyone. Every Joe takes a lulav. Who lanes the Megillah? I don't know. Anyone who could read could lane the Megillah. But for a moyel, you need to be an expert. But says the Taz, no. You know the real reason why Milah is Doicha Shabbos and we're not Goyzer Shema Yavirenu Da'al Amas B'Shus Harabim? Because there's an explicit pasuk that Milah is Doicha Shabbos. Say, really? There's an explicit pasuk that Milas Doich Shabbos. Where does it say? It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah. It doesn't say that Yimal es Yiladascha Afilu b'Shabbos. It doesn't say that. But says the Taz, since in many times in the Torah it talks about the mitzvah Milah, and we have an explicit extra pasuk in Parshas Tazria. So we have an extra pasuk, and we darshan the extra pasuk to teach that Milah is Doicha Shabbos. So if we have an extra pasuk that says Milah is Doicha Shabbos, the rabbis cannot come along and say no, Milah is not Doicha Shabbos. In other words, the principle of the Taz Hayadua, the well-known Taz, is if the pasuk says beferish mutter, the rabbis can't, would not want to, are not able to, shouldn't uproot it entirely. So there are two. If the Torah says something is asur, then for sure the rabbis don't say mutter because that's become aseh. That they don't even do. That they never do. That they never do even partially or temporarily. They could do it as a hirasha, but they wouldn't do it permanently. But even though the rabbis could matter something, it could answer something the Torah matters permanently, but not if there's an explicit pasuk. So far we have two examples that the Taz gives. Number one, we don't make a gzeira that you're not to blow a shofar on Rosh Hashanah because you might fix a musical instrument. And number two, we don't aser Milah on Shabbos because of Shema Yavireno Dalet Amos. The Taz in Choshen Mishpat repeats this principle. Now, if you ever learn Choshen Mishpat, if you learn Yoredeya, on the side it's the Shach and the Taz. If you learn Choshen Mishpat, it's the Shach and the Sma, and the Taz is in very small letters on the bottom. The Taz is discussing the following issue. Chelev. Chelev. Are you allowed to get Hana from Chelev? What? Yes. Yes. Very good. You're allowed to get Hana from Chelev. Are you allowed to get, pig? Are you allowed to get Hana from pig? Pig is not Asr b'Hana. But are you allowed, so now the question is, are you allowed to do business with something that you're not allowed to eat? You're not allowed to. Now this is a very important rule. If you're in the workplace and you have non-Jewish employees and you want to order non-kosher food for them, possibly the way to do it is you call up and you say, deliver to my office X, Y, and Z, and you don't touch the food, you don't deal with the food, you don't pick up the food, you don't hand it, you have somebody else deal with it. But for a Jew to do business in non-kosher food, you're not allowed to. You're not allowed, anything you're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to deal in business with. It's halacha. It might be even d'oraisa. It might even be d'oraisa. It's machlokes whether d'oraisa or d'rabbanan. But chelev, there's no isser hana on chelev. Now the question is, are you allowed to do business or buy and sell chelev? And chelev may be different. The Taz writes that chelev, you're allowed to make a transaction with chelev. Why are you allowed to make a transaction with chelev? Because since there's a beferish pasuk, va'asa l'chol malacha, it says by chelev, you could use it for any malacha, so you're not allowed to eat it, but you're allowed to get hana. So chelev, you're allowed to make a transaction with chelev. Why? Maybe it's asur midrabanan, says the Taz, because since the Torah explicitly says that you're allowed to transact chelev, it says v'asa l'chol malacha, therefore the Rabbanon would never aser. In other words, the principle is that anytime we have a beferish pasuk that something is mutter, the Chachamim will never aser. That's the second time where the Taz enunciates this principle. Comes the Taz in place number 3 in Yoredeya, Siman Kuf Yud Zayin, and the Taz deals with the following issue: are you allowed to buy fruit of Shvius? Are you allowed to sell Shemitah fruit? You have it. I have Shemitah fruit. Could I sell it? I'm allowed to. I'm allowed to. I'm allowed to. However, you're not allowed to do schoira. You're allowed to do mechira. You're allowed to sell it, but you can't do schoira. What does schoira mean? Business. What's the definition of business? To pick it and then to sell it. If I have it in my storehouse, I could sell it. But I can't pick it and sell it. Can I buy it and sell it? So Tosfos says, probably not. And Tosfos says the following. Tosfos in Masechta Sukkah, Daf Lamed Testament Aleph, number 5 on the sheet, 3 lines on the end. Tosfos brings that he says 3 lines in Ve'efshar hakoina mechaveroi kedei laharviach v'limkar b'yoiker, to buy pairs of shmita, to profit, to sell at a higher price, that is considered schaira. What's the proof? Says Tosfos, because there's a Mishnah that groups together. Don't do schaira with pairs of shmita, or b'chairos, or trumais, or nevelos, or treifais. So ask Tosfos, wait a second. When are you not allowed to do business with treifa and nevela? But there's a halacha you're allowed to sell a treifa or nevela to a guy. It's a pasuk. So Tosfos is bothered. What does the Mishnah mean? You're not allowed to do business with a nevela and a treifa. It's a pasuk in Chumash. What do you do with a nevela or treifa? You sell it to a guy. So it must be that you're allowed to sell to a guy, but you can't buy it and then sell it to someone else because that's chayra. So the Taz asks on Tosfos, just because there's a pasuk you're allowed to sell it to a guy, but maybe there's an Isser D'Rabbanan. What do you prove from the fact that the Torah says you're allowed to sell a nevela to a guy? That doesn't mean it's mutter to sell a nevela to a guy. That means it's midoraisa mutter to sell a nevela to a guy. But maybe midrabanan it's also to sell a nevela to a guy. So the Taz therefore derives again for the 3rd time the following principle. That if the Torah says explicitly you're allowed to do something, the Rabbanan either can't, won't, shouldn't, don't want to, aser it midrabanan. That's the principle. This is a principle that the Taz repeats 3 times in Shulchan Aruch. Once in Aruch Chaim in Hilchos Shofar, once in Choshen Mishpat Hilchos Chelev, and once in Yeridea Hilchos Shmita and Hilchos Treifa. This Taz became so well known that if you look in the Achronim don't even tell you where the Taz is. The Achronim just say Taz Hayadua, the well-known Taz. And they expect you to know the Taz in Archaim, Tavkuf Peches, the Taz in Choshen Mishpat Siman Beis, the Taz in Yeridea Siman Kuf Yud Zayin. So yesterday I was speaking to my friend Rabbi Aaron Jacoby. So I said, you have any good Maramakoimas on this Taz? So he called me back a little while later that Reb David Cohen, the Rav of Gvul Yavitz, not only, he actually wrote a sefer on the Taz. On this Taz, he wrote a sefer on the Taz. And the name of the sefer is Hataz Hayadua. That's the name of the sefer. So I called up my friend in Virginia. Now you're going to see I have a good story on this one. I called up Gedalia. Said, no, I need the sefer Hataz Hayadua. So he called Beagle Eyes, and then he called Sfarim Center, and he called all the stores in Borough Park and Sfarim World. No, nobody has it. So fine, I sort of gave up. But then I was thinking, if I'm giving a shiur on the Taz, how could I not have the sefer Hataz Hayadua? I mean, then when is the sefer ever going to see the light of day? You know? So I realized I should just call Reb David Cohen. I don't know why. Today I was a little embarrassed to call, because the only way to get it is I would have to send an Uber. I have to explain what an Uber, you know. So I told Gedaya, here's Reb David Cohen's number, call up. So he calls Reb David Cohen, and his wife picks up. His wife says, the Reb David has hours. He said, no, I don't have a shayla. I need a sefer. Which sefer? Hataz Hayadua. He says, how are you going to get it? We're going to send a ride. So what do I need to do? So she said, tell him to knock on the door. He said, no, they don't. Uber doesn't do that. So it became very complicated. So she said, okay, hold on 1 second. So we all, figure she's going to get Reb David Cohen on the phone. 2 minutes later, Pesach Kron gets on the phone. Yes, what do you need? Because Rabbi Pesach Kron is a Talmud Reb David Cohen, and Rabbi Pesach Kron was learning by Reb David Cohen then, and he heard Glatstein wants something. So what does Rabbi Glatstein want? Hataz Hayadua. Rabbi Glatstein wants Hataz Hayadua? How many people in the shiur? So I told him, say like 50. She said 50. Okay, he's going to send all his Taz Hayaduas, and we're going to... So he said, how are we going to get it? No problem. Rabbi Kron tells me, probably somebody comes from Kew Gardens to the shiur, and I'm going to bring it to Kew Gardens. So I called up my friend Rav Shlomo Margareft. I said, call up Pesach Kron. He's coming back to Kew Gardens 6:30 with Hataz Hayadua. But apparently not so many made it here. So we have a couple.
I can get it over Shabbos. I'm going to see him. I'll be with him Shabbos.
I think I might have taken his last cut. Yeah?
Yeah.
So you'll tell him about the shiur. You'll send him the clip. You'll put on the, okay.
Bar mitzvah, I can get it.
Make sure he knows, when you talk on the shiur, tell him that's me, okay? So
His son is my nephew.
that's yichus. So anyway, so we have today at the shiur, Hataz HaYidua. There's an entire sefer just on the Taz. Hataz HaYidua. So Reb David Cohen brings a number of very interesting Maramakoimos on this Taz. Lamda Shem Maramakoimos. Reb David Cohen is one of the Gdolei HaPoskim today, but also a tremendous mechaber. He wrote dozens and dozens of svarim. Anytime I need a sefer on something, like a topic, right? Reb David Cohen not only has like a chapter, he has a sefer on that topic. Anyway, first he points out that this svar of the Taz is already found in the Rishonim. The Meiri and Masechta Megillah on Daf Gimel Amud Beis has the kasha. Shofar, we don't blow on Shabbos. Lulav, we don't shake on Shabbos. Megillah, we don't read on Shabbos. Why? Shema Yavirenu. So then why is Mila Doicha Shabbos? And he says the same Yisoid. It doesn't say anywhere explicitly you shake a lulav on Shabbos. It says you shake a lulav. So the rabbis will come along and say, shake the lulav, just not on Shabbos. Blow the shofar, just not on Shabbos. But there's a pasuk in the Chumash, do Mila on Shabbos, the Chachamim will not be oikaret. Now I would have said,
It's a
Trush. It's a trush, the Rav said, right?
No?
Tazria.
it's not explicit, but we darshan that that's what the pasuk is saying. We're going to come back to that in a minute.
Doesn't count?
So one of the questions that we have to deal with, friends, is the Rishonim. Because all the Rishonim asked this question. Why isn't Mila Doicha Shabbos? Excuse me, why is Mila Doicha Shabbos? Thank you. Why don't we make a Gzera Shema Yavrena Da'ad Amos? The Ran asked the question, and he doesn't give the Taz's answer. Tosfos and Megillah asked the question, and he doesn't give the Taz's answer. So where I come from, if you have a Rishon who asks a kasha, and you have a teretz to it, you know what that means? That you are dead wrong. Because if Tosfos asked the question, and you gave the answer, you know what Tosfos feels about your answer? That you're wrong. It's not true. So how the Taz was a great achroin, but he wasn't a Rishon. How could the Taz say this answer? Why would we hold to the answer if none of the Rishonim give this answer by Mila, except, as we just pointed out, the Meiri? But we're going to come back to that. The first thing we want to examine is the Svara. If you would have asked me, what's Pshat in the Taz HaYidua? Why, if there's an explicit pasuk that says you're allowed to do something, where the Chacham say you're not allowed to, I may have said that the rabbis don't have the power to do that. Hashem never invested the Chacham with the Kayach that if it says explicitly it's mutter, ta'aser. However, the Achronim don't say that. The Achronim give very interesting reasons. So for example, if you look at number 8, the Shal Sechuvas Bikurei Shloimei, Reb Shloimei Avraham Rozcheta, he says a very interesting thing. That it's not that the Chachamim are not able to, or should not. Now I will point out, if you examine the language of the Taz, if you look at number 2, the Taz says on the second line, the Taz says on the last wide line, Loi Ratsu, they didn't want to. Not that they can't. They didn't want to. They could. They don't want to. Now why wouldn't they want to? Now if you look in the Taz in Chosh Mishpat, there the Taz says, Ein koyach chachamim lesar. They don't have the capacity to. That's a very different svara. But anyway, this tshuva says that the reason why the chachamim don't want to, because they feel that their reasoning would not be accepted. Imagine they come into shul, and they say, I want everyone to know that you're not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. So the guy says, Rabbi, I don't understand. It says in the stone Chumash you're allowed to do it. So the rabbi could give drashas, and he could say this, and he could say that. Nobody's going to listen. If it says in the Chumash, you're allowed to do it, nobody's going to listen to the Chachamim. They say, you're not allowed to do it. So in order to avoid having their words not listened to, they have the capacity to aser. They're able to aser. It's within their yichaylas. It's just, they chose not to because lo yikablu divreihem. I saw in a tshuva, and I was not able to find it inside. I saw it quoted from the Ber Yaakov that the reason they chose not to, a very similar reason, is because it would be nira k'chucha v'tulula. It would look like a joke. Look like a joke. The Torah says yeah, and the rabbis say no. So, what are we supposed to do? Who do we follow? It's very confusing to people. So as long as it's not explicit in the Torah, the Chachamim would be willing to aser. The very interesting tshuva, an amazing tshuva, Shas Tshuva's Heichal Yitzchak. Heichal Yitzchak was written by Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, first chief rabbi of the state of Israel. He was, by the way, a goyin oilam and a goyin otzam. Imamish knew on his fingertips Kol HaTorah Kula, and he has very interesting tshuvos, and he clears the chakira. He says, what's pshat in this taz, that if it's contravening an explicit pasuk, the chacham will not be oiker? He says on the 5th line, Ima kavonahi shebedavar amafurash b'toira leheter ein koyach biyad chachamim. Is the pshat they don't have the power? Oy sheyesh lahem, or do they have the power? Ela shehim gadru al atzmam shaloi lesar. But they basically disciplined themselves. Kedei shaloi loseis makoim letzedukim l'radoi sheyomru la'am ru'u chachamim ki lo oisim tar mishalahem. A new svara. You know why the Chachamim will not contravene an explicit pasuk? Because the tzedaikim are going to take it, and they're going to make a laughing stock out of it, and they're going to publish in the newspapers that the rabbis make up their own Torah, that the Torah says ya, and the rabbis say nisht. So in order to avoid the controversy, not that it's going to be a laughing stock, more than that, not that the people are not going to accept, the tzedaikim are going to mock such a decree. Says Rav Herzog, in his opinion, it's mistaber ketzad hasheni, that the reason for the taz is because of the tzedaikim. Why? Because if you're going to say that they don't have the koyach to be oiker davar min haTorah, could someone show me in Kol HaTorah Kula a makar that the chachamim don't have the yecholes laker davar min haTorah mikol v'chol? Why not? Why don't they? The Gemara says yesh koyach biyad chachamim laker davar min haTorah b'sheva al taseh. So you can say, no, not when it's mafurish b'kra. What's the makar? What's the makar of such a thing? But if there's a svara, so this was a hanhaga that the Chachamim had, why not to apply this power even in a situation where it would be oiker davar min haTorah? Marv Rabbi say. So why don't the Rishonim agree to the svara of the Taz? Doesn't that mean that Taz is incorrect? Doesn't that mean, how could the Taz be correct if Tosfos and the Ran ask that you shouldn't be able to do Milah on Shabbos because Shema Yavirenu, and they don't give the Taz's answer? So, there's a very important sefer you need to know about. And the Pri Megadim wrote a Hakdama to Shulchan Aruch. The name of the Hakdama is the Psicha Koilelas. In fact, they put out, not just, an annotated Psicha Koilelas. Rabbi Usher Eisenberger in Detroit put out an annotated Psicha Koilelas. This is like the Pri Megadim's Hakdama to Halacha. And the Pri Megadim in the Psicha Koilelas declares the following shaila. Lefi the Shita the Taz, that the Chachamim won't be oiker davar min haTorah if it's mefurash. What if it's not mefurash in the pasuk? What if it's halacha l'moshe misinai? What if it's Yud Gimel Midah Shatar Nidreshes Bahem? What if it's a drasha? Well, even then the Taz hold that the Chachamim won't be oiker something that's explicit? Now you say, of course the Taz would say it there, because the Taz says that Milah is Doiche Shabbos, because we have a Beferish pasuk that Milah is Doiche Shabbos. But the truth is, do we have a Beferish pasuk that Milah is Doiche Shabbos? We don't have a Beferish pasuk. We have a pasuk, B'yoyim Hashmini Yimar B'sar Losai, which the Gemara Darshins is referring to Shabbos. So the Taz clearly holds that his svara applies even to a drasha. But it could be the Ran and Tosfos who don't say like the Taz. It's not that they don't buy the Taz's svara. They agree to the Taz's svara. They agree that if something is explicit in a pasuk, the Chachamim won't contravene. But they take the other tzad of the Chakir, the Pri Megadim. They say that's only if it's explicit in the pasuk. But if it's a drasha or a halach l'moshe misinai or Yud Gimel Midah Shatar Nidreshes Bahem, maybe then the Chachamim could make a gzeira, despite the fact they're being oiker legamri a drasha of the Torah. So the fact that the Rishonim don't give the svara of the Taz, it doesn't mean they don't hold the Taz. They don't hold of the Taz's application, even in a case where it's a drasha. Okay. Not everybody agrees to the Taz. I'm going to tell you one kasha on the Taz. I will tell you because Zemi's here that Rabbi Kiva Eger defends the Taz. But I'm going to tell you the Chavos Yair's kasha on the Taz, We were zoichet to be the summer by the kever, the Chavas Yair, and worms. Chavas Yair has the following question. Chavas Yair asks, the Taz cannot be correct. Because I'm going to bring you a case where not only does the Torah say something is mutter and the Chachamim aser, I'm going to give you a situation where the Torah says it's a mitzvah and the Torah asers it. Chavas Yair was Rabbi Yair Chaim Bachrach, one of the early Achronim, Gedolei HaPoskim. No relation to Baccarat crystal, okay? Bachrach. But there's somebody, what? Germany, he lived in Worms. There's someone in the neighborhood here who's a descendant of... Good to know. Okay, so the Chavas Yair has the following kasha. Now this is a very difficult question because it's hard to know what he's talking about. Are you allowed to charge a guy interest?
No.
It's a mitzvah.
No, yes, it's a mitzvah.
The answer is no.
And the answer is one of those three answers is right. The Torah says it's a mitzvah. It says, Lo yishazreo ve'es ha-nachri yishach. It says, not only, it says in the pasuk, that's ha-nachri yishach. You should charge the guy interest. It's a mitzvah, the Gemara says. And yet, and you have to know what this means, the Chachamim asered it. Say, what? The Chachamim asered it? Well, I mean, so then how do you do anything? Okay, we'll have to discuss a different time. What are the parameters of the Isser D'Rabbanan of charging a guy interest? It usually doesn't apply. But there is an Isser, under certain circumstances, you can charge the guy interest. Says the Chavos Yair, if the Taz is correct, we just disproved the Taz. Because the Taz holds that even if the Torah says something is mutter, the Chachamim wouldn't go and say it's asr. And I just showed you an example where the Torah says not only is it mutter, it's a mitzvah, and the rabbis say you're not allowed to do it. And Rabbi Kiva Eger defends the Taz in Shuva and Chelik Beis Siman Lamed Beis. So yesterday I had my mezuzahs checked. So they came, two came in, Rabbi Lieberman and his assistant came in. Whole day job. And the other Sofer, I don't know, he's from Eretz Yisrael. He sees me learning. What am I learning? I tell him the Taz HaYidua. I feel like that's a good way to, because I figure nobody knows what the Taz HaYidua is. And, they're not going to ask. You tell somebody, the Taz HaYidua. The last thing they ask is, what's the Taz HaYidua? You sound like... So it worked for a little while. The Taz HaYidua, I said. Which Taz HaYidua? So the Taz, it says... So he said, I looked mir and cup, there's a kasha on the Taz HaYidua. And Taka, I found, right in the Ber Yaakov, he asked this kasha, that the Chacham Tzvi asked this question, Noid Behuda asked this kasha. We all know that after a woman gives birth, so she's tamei for a boy 7 days, for a girl 14 days, and then she has dam toyar, for a boy 33 days, for a girl 66 days. And yet, Bizman Hazeh, we don't say dam toyar is mutter, we say it's dam nida. We're choshesh for dam nida. And it's also right? It's also. You have to wait 6 weeks, 7 weeks until she has no more dam. Wait a second. The Torah says that for 66 days or 33 days she's tar. This is against the Taz. The Taz says, where the Torah says explicitly mutter, the Chachamim can't answer. So how in the world the Torah says Shishim Yom Shishis Yamim Teishev al Demei Tahara? What does Demei Tahara mean? She's tar. So how could the rabbi say it's asr? I don't know the answer. I didn't get a chance to look up the Rabbi Yehuda. I would say, just kishani la'atzmi, the Torah never says she's mutter. The Torah says she's tahar. There's a famous yisoid in the Kuzari that it's a big mistake to think a nida is asr because she's tameh. The tumah and the isser are not related. They're two separate inyanim. So it could be that she's tar, but she's asr. The rabbis say she's asr. The rabbis would never say she's tameh, but the rabbis could say she's asr. That's what I would say. But anyway, back to the ranch. Now we have a very big problem here, because we just learned the Taz HaYidua, and we even saw Reb David Cohen's sefer on the Taz. So if there's a sefer on a subject, that means it's a real thing to reckon with. You can't just, there's a sefer on it, written on Coney Island Avenue. So the question is like this. The Torah says you can't marry Ammoni Moavi. Why? Because they didn't give you bread. That means the pasuk is saying you're allowed to eat the bread of a guy. So how could the rabbis come along and ask the bread of a guy? The Torah says in the sixth Parsha you're allowed to eat the bread of a guy. So this question was raised by number 14, Shalosh Tshuvas Pnei Maven, of Rav Nasanel Fried. So first he wants to bring in, many Rishonim say that the bread of a guy is only asar babayis, but not basada. Some people, they only eat kosher in their house, but not on the road, which is ridiculous. What's the nafkamina? There's no difference. It's metamte misliboy on the road also. But there is one area in halacha where there is a leniency basada. There's only one area of halacha. What's that? Pas akum. So if anybody here happens to be spending time in fields, not on the road, fields, then pas akum is mutter, but we don't paskin that way. We paskin like the Rambam, it's still asr. So he's still up the creek without a paddle. Because what are you going to say according to the shita of the Rambam? So without the Rambam, you could say the Klal Yisrael were besada, so therefore they were allowed to eat the bread of Ammon and Moav. So then he suggests, the halacha is when you're conquering Eretz Yisrael, you're allowed to eat chazer. Kadli de chazri. Fatty bacon hogs. When you're conquering Eretz Yisrael, you may eat fatty bacon hogs. I don't know what it tastes like, but if you wanted to eat it, that's the industry you need to go into. Conquering Eretz Yisrael. So it could be they were conquering Eretz Yisrael then, so not only were they allowed to eat pasakim, they could even go further, but that's problematic, because some of the Isurei Bishul we learn out from the pasuk, Oichel Ba'kesef Tashbireni. How can you learn out anything from there? That was when they were conquering Eretz Yisrael. So he says the following Yisoid. It's very hard to understand what he means and how it applies, and that's as follows. He wants to know. The Torah says you're allowed to marry 2 wives. Does anybody know where in the Torah it says you're allowed to marry 2 wives? The 6th Parsha. Ki yalish de noshim hoacha. Yeah. So Rabbi Gershom, right? Rabbeinu Gershom. How does he have a right to ask her 2 wives? He's violating the Tas HaYidua.
Sfardim still left today.
Not the Sfardim where I come from. Yeah? What? So he's allowed to do it temporarily. So he's saying the Noida B'Yehuda says like this. If Rabbeinu Gershon would have said, I know the Torah mattered, I'm going to aser, you're not allowed to do that. But he asered for like a side reason. Whenever the Chachamim are asering for a side reason, a reason that the Torah is not entertaining, you're allowed to. So for example, when it comes to ribbis, the reason the Chachamim aser ribbis is not because you might come to take ribbis from a Jew. That you can't do. Because the Torah asered ribbis of a Jew and matter the ribbis of a guy. They aser to take ribbis from a guy because you might learn from their behavior. That's a side reason that the Chachamim could do. So likewise, pas akum, they asered for a side reason. It's hard to understand that applies for everything. That applies for Shema Yavirenu Dalet Amos. Why can't we say, you're not allowed to do Milah on Shabbos? And the Chachamim say, we're not saying it's a malacha. We're saying for a side reason, you might come to carry. It's very hard to understand what he means. Comes the Yafa Lelev, Reb Rachamim Nisim Falaji. He was a Sfardi, by the way. Yeah?
Sounds like
He says the following reason. He said, not a kasha to begin with. Could the rabbis say you're not to blow shofar when Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos? Yeah. As long as they don't aser shofar entirely, meaning they can't uproot a mitzvah entirely, but they could uproot a mitzvah under circumstances. On Shabbos, they can't say you can't blow shofar because Shema Yisak and Kli Shir, because that would be getting rid of shofar entirely. But on Shabbos alone, they could. The rabbis never asered the bread of a guy. They asered the bread of a private guy, but not paspalter, not the bread of a baker. So the pasuk doesn't say all bread of a guy is mutter. It says bread of a guy is mutter. How would we have eaten it? We would have made sure it was Arnold's bread. But avada, if it was Tony's bread that he baked in his personal oven, we wouldn't have eaten it. In other words, The Chachamim can aser under all circumstances, but they could aser under limited circumstances.
Is bread that has a hechsher, is that considered?
The bread that they sell in stores is commercialized bakers. That's pas palter that you're allowed to eat, except for on the Aser Simei Tshuva.
Yeah.
And the Mishnah Berurah says
But it's pasakum, so why?
it's not pasakum. We don't call it pasakum.
Why?
You're not allowed to eat pasakum. Orthodox Jews.
Pasakum or pasalter?
When we say pas, it means even pas palter.
Even pasalter.
Even pas palter. Even pas palter. The Mishnah Berurah, for all you who want to know, Mishnah Berurah says you shouldn't eat pas palter on Shabbos. So, for example, in my yeshiva, we always follow Mishnah Berurah. So, let's say Stella D'oro cookies. It's a great hechsher, but it's pas palter. So, Shabbos, you don't, in the shul, I'm makbid that at the Chiddush, we only have pas Yisrael. Why? Because it's Shabbos. So, during the week, you could have pas palter. On Shabbos, we try not to. But that's the Mishnah Berurah. But Aser Simei Tshuva, everybody's careful not to even have paspal. Okay, now comes the Klichem. The Klichem was a Talmud of Avnei Nezer. He's one of the most lumdish Svarim on Chumash, Rav Meir Dun Polotsky. And he says a Gavaldige Yisaid. You know what the Taz HaYidua means? That if the Torah says something is mutter, the Chachamim can't aser? That's if the Torah says something is mutter l'doiros. For example, you could do Mila on Shabbos l'doiros. You could blow the shofar l'doiros. If the Torah says blow shofar, it means for all generations. But if the Torah is saying a story of what happened in the Midbar, I have a question. The Yisr D'Rabbanan of Pasakum, when do you think it happened? You think Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai? By the way, there's an Yisr D'Rabbanan of Pasakum. Maybe he told them that there will be one day, but he didn't impose it immediately. He certainly did not impose it immediately. Many of these kind of gzeros were not imposed until the times of Ezra, and possibly earlier already in the 40 years, but not immediately. So when the Torah says, the Torah doesn't say, Hashem says, you could eat the bread of a guy. It says that Amoin and Moav were aser, because when they served you bread, which implies that at that period of time you were allowed to eat the bread. Okay? Now the Chachamim are authorized to come along and aser, either contravening the pasuk. No, it's not a stira. We'll just say the pasuk was before the Chachamim imposed their gzeira. Historically, that pasuk was referring to an event in history before the rabbis made the gzeira. Now we can't say that by shofar, because the pasuk by shofar says you're allowed to blow the shofar l'netzach netzachim. The pasuk by Mila says you're allowed to do Mila on Shabbos l'netzach netzachim. But the pasuk by the Midbar, it doesn't say you're allowed to eat the bread of a guy l'netzach netzachim. It just says they are aser because at that period in history they should have brought you bread. Oh, but that means you were allowed to eat it. Yeah, that day you were allowed to eat it. And later on, the Chachamim came along and they aser it midrabanan. But that's not called contravening an explicit pasuk. Comes the Ginzei Yosef. And he says, I don't understand the question to begin with. Are you allowed, if Tony makes you bread, are you allowed to eat it? No. You are. Should I tell you how? You cook it in a pot. If you're mavashel pasakum, it becomes mutter. So you have a kasha. How could the Chachamim master pasakum? And it says they should have brought you bread. Yeah, but if they would have brought you, couldn't have eaten it. We could have eaten it. You could cook it. If you cook it, it becomes mutter. So it's not called contravening the pasuk. The pasuk taka says the bread of a guy is mutter. But the Chacham asked it. They asked it, but there are ways to matter it.
Ingredients also.
What? No, ingredients, it's aser even if it's kosher. What? No, pasakum is not a matter of it not being kosher.
No, I'm saying they were lumdish with cooking it.
No, maybe they weren't, but they could have. In other words, we don't know whether they would have eaten it or they wouldn't have. But if they would have served it, it could have been eaten. Yeah. Like theoretically, it could have been eaten.
You have to cook it.
Another thing. Pas akum is aser. Pas akum is aser. All pas akum is aser. Only mechamishas minei dagan. Only if it's wheat, oats, spelt, rye, or barley. What if it's corn or rice? There's no pas akum there. There's no pas akum. But that still has a din of pas. It could still be called lechem. It's not pasakim, it's the lechem. So when the Torah says, al davar shaloi kidmu eschem balechem, it could be talking about the lechem that's mutter. It could be called lechem. You don't make hamoitzi, but it could be called lechem. And here's the answer that I like the best. There's Rabbeinu Bechaye. Rabbeinu Bechaye has a kasha. What do you want from these Moabites? What do you want from these Ammonites? They should have brought you food. They sent messengers. They checked what the needs of the Jewish people were. And they got the following report. We don't have any food needs. We have mun. We have no water needs. We have the Beresh of Miriam. So they went back and they reported that the Jewish people don't need anything. So why do we have tightness on them? They should have brought us food. We weren't hungry. Why do we have tightness on them? That they should have brought us drink. We weren't thirsty. Says Rabbeinu Bechaye, no, we wouldn't have needed to eat it anyway, because we had food, we had drink. But Derech Eretz dictates they should have offered it to us whether you need it or not. If someone comes to your house, you serve them food. Not because you know, they could have eaten 10 minutes before. Someone walks into your house, you sit them down, you give them a piece of cake, you give them a hot coffee. Even if they're not thirsty, they're not hungry. That's Derech Eretz. And if they don't have the civility and the good manners to offer you something good to eat, that means they have bad character. Furthermore, the Medrash in Vayikra Rabbah says that what Ammon and Moav did was an example of someone who didn't do chesed to someone who doesn't need chesed. How's that? Because the Torah says, Al davar shaloi kidmu eschem balechem u'mayim. For the Medrash, we didn't need lechem, we had the man. We didn't need mayim, we had the be'er. But, so says the Medrash, umadach, someone who doesn't do chesed, to someone who doesn't need it is punished. And they're outcast from the Jewish people forever. Alachas kama v'kama. Someone who doesn't do chesed, to someone who needs chesed. The Zohar takes it even further. The Zohar says, if somebody comes on the road, and you give him a warm greeting, and you give him a nice shalom aleichem, and you say kind words, it's deemed in the eyes of Hashem as if you fed him bread and as if you gave them to drink. Says the Zohar, how do I know this? Because the pasuk says that Ammon and Moav didn't give us food and didn't give us drink. Frek the Zohar, we didn't need food, we didn't need a drink. Says the Zohar, what it means is they didn't greet us. They weren't courteous. They didn't say Shalom Aleichem, welcome our dear cousins. We're so happy that you're going to steal David HaMelech out of our DNA and he's going to become the Melech Yisrael. They should have had a kind word for us. If they would have had a kind word, it would be considered as if they fed us bread and gave us to drink water. But now that they didn't greet us, now that they weren't makdim shalom, if you see someone on the road and you give them shalom, it's like you fed them lunch. It's like you gave them dinner. And if you see someone on the road and you turn the other way, it's like you stole their parnasa. Furthermore, there's a Sefer Drashos Beis Yosef. Now, I never heard of the Sefer. I searched for the Sefer. It's quoted in the Sefer Megadim Chadashim. As far as I know, there is no such thing as a Sefer Drashos Beis Yosef. That's a sure way for somebody to come up with it. I don't know what the Sefer Drashos Beis Yosef is. I think it's Rabbi Yosef Karo, but there's no such thing as Sefer Drashos Beis Yosef. There's a Sefer Toldos Yitzchak, and in the back there's a Sefer Magid Mesharim, Drashos Beis Yosef. Anyway, the Sefer Drashos Beis Yosef says like this. There is no taina they should have brought food. It doesn't say, Al asher lo kidmu eschem, Al divar asher lo kidmu eschem. They should have said diburim. That's the taina. It's because they didn't speak to us, they didn't greet us, they didn't give us shalom. Says the Megadim Chadashim, Rabbi Yoel Weiss, he's a Talmid Chacham Muflik, lives in Shmuel HaNavi. I was chus to meet him. He says, according to Rabbeinu Bechaye, according to Vayikra Rabbah, according to Shiurim Rabbah, according to the Zohar, Kasha me'ikar alesa. The kasha on the Taz HaYidua is, how could the Chachamim aser bread? But the Torah says they should have brought you bread. That means you could have eaten it. No. Rabbeinu Bechaye says, we didn't even need to eat it. We didn't even need the drink. They should have brought it to us. We weren't going to eat it anyway. We weren't going to eat it. We would have just kept it on our table, and when they would have walked out, we would have put it in the garbage, like a lot of things that people give, People come, they give things, you have Shalach Manas. Everything that you get for Shalach Manas, you say, oh, thank you so much, and you actually consume it. 99% of people's Shalach Manas ends up in like a big bin somewhere. In the same bin. The day after Purim, everyone brings it to the same room and fills up that room with all the Shalach Manas. So just because they're going to give it to you, doesn't mean we're going to eat it. We didn't need to eat it. According to the Zohar, it doesn't even mean they didn't give us food. It means they didn't greet us. So it could be that this is not a problem for the Taz HaYidua. So tonight we learned that there's a Yisoid of the Taz in Archaim, Choshen Mishpat, and Yoredeya, that even though the Chachamim have the capacity to uproot davar min Torah, but not if it's explicitly in the Torah, and that's why we do Milah on Shabbos, and that's why we're not mevatel shofar under all circumstances, and that's why Perosh Shviyas are perhaps you don't do Schaira with, and that is why Nevela and Treifa, there's no Isser D'Rabbanan just to sell it. Either it was Besadeh, or it was Mochemes Eretz Yisrael, or it was a side reason, or Pas Palter is still mutter, or you could matter the bread by cooking it, or the Gzera didn't even go into effect yet, or, says Rabbeinu Bechaye, says the Zohar, we wouldn't have eaten it anyway, we didn't need the bread, we had food, we had drink. The taina on them was they should have greeted us, they should have showed us Derech Eretz, and Baruch Hashem, we were able to defend the Taz Hayadua, and therefore this coming Rosh Hashanah, because of the Taz Hayadua, we will still be blowing shofar be'ezus Hashem in the year Taf Shin Pei, Torah Shabal Peh, so we should be Zoiche to have a year as Hashem of Torah Shabbat Peh, Lanu L'Chol Yisrael, Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.